Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, it's Jessa, back for another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. And while I sit here recording alone in our guest bedroom actually today, I want to invite you to participate with me. You know, I send this out, it's sort of a one-way conversation, and I would love to have it be two-way. So if you have feedback, if you've got ideas for things you want me to cover on the show, and especially if you have a question, I would love to hear from you. If you go to bettersexpodcast.com, you can easily send me an email from there. But you can also record a question. There's a little, it's called a widget at the bottom of every page that allows you hit the little microphone, you record a question, and if it seems relevant to more, a bunch of people, I would put it on an episode and answer it live on the air. So I just want to invite you to do that if you're interested. Trying to be helpful, I'm looking for ways to make sure I'm meeting your needs, those of you who are listening to the show. Today's episode is, it's about the work of Gina Odgen. So she was a therapist and did a bunch of research about how people experienced their sexuality. She was asking questions in a whole different way than anyone had asked before. And as my guests are going to describe, she got 4,000 responses in less than a year, back when she wasn't even sure she'd get any. And she's developed that. She developed that overlapping with her sort of native spirituality training into what's called the 4D wheel. So a wheel of 4 core dynamics: mind, body, emotion, and spirit. And by using this wheel in particular ways, people can find real transformation and change. And I guess I would even say insight. So Gina unfortunately passed in 2018. But my guests today, Tina Schermer and Kamara McAndrews, are carrying on her legacy. So they have taken over her 4D network. Kamara is the director of programming, and then Tina is helping run the annual workshop down in Mexico. They're really trying to keep her work and her legacy alive and benefiting people. So they're here to describe, what is this 4D wheel? Why is it so powerful? How does it work? And, to give you some ideas about how you might apply this at home. It's not like you necessarily have to go see a therapist or go to a workshop, although you absolutely might want to do that. But you can actually start to put some of this practice into your life yourself. You can use these tools to make some real shifts in issues that you're facing, challenges you're facing. So it's all about the 4D wheel today. I hope you enjoy it. So Tina, Kamara, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Yeah. So, let's just start out with Gina Odgen. Who was she? What was her research? What was her mission?
Okay. Well, Gina was an amazing sex therapist who struggled to find any ways to research sex therapy when she was doing family therapy. And then she decided that she wanted to understand women who were easily orgasmic. And so she started going around the country and asking women who were easily orgasmic if they would be willing to be part of a survey. And so then she started getting all of these surveys in the mail, in the snail mail, piling up all over her house. And what she started to see was that when people would talk about the best orgasms, the oh God moment, the amazing kind of sexual experiences that they were having, that they were also talking about a spiritual experience. Not always, but a lot of the time. And that there was no research that had anything to do with spirituality and sexuality. And at the very same time, she was digging into her Peruvian roots and studying under a Peruvian shaman to learn how to use a Pachacuti mesa, which is similar to the Native American medicine wheel. So while she was doing research and studying and looking at all these research examples, she was also at her mesa at night in a spiritual space and recognizing all of a sudden, aha, this is it. This is the template that we need for sex therapy because nothing else has a spiritual component. Not only that, but it helps people to look at mind, body, heart, and spirit. So the Pachacuti Mesa is similar to the Native American medicine wheel in that it has the 4 directions.
Yeah.
And so it might be different for different people's cosmology, which is completely fine. But what happens for a client is that when they step into it, then they can start to understand their dilemma mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And there's a lot of different ways to kind of mix and match all of that. So, Tina, add in.
Well, one of the things I think that Gina found, nobody really has done a study larger than this with regard to asking people about their sexuality, how they experience their sexuality, really, which is what Gina was asking about. How do you experience your sexuality? And what came out of Gina's research was people, as they described how they experienced their sexuality, it was clear that they experienced it in their body, in their emotions, in their mind, and spiritually. And this was what was new. Nobody had really asked the questions in that way.
Yeah.
Because so often people ask, about behaviors, right?
Right.
Very specific ways. They ask it in empirical forms of research. And she didn't ask about it that way. She asked about it more in narrative kinds of ways. And so that's what emerged. And so it became clear to her that people were experiencing their sexuality on all 4 of these domains. And so I think that's really what became clear to her, is that she needed a model that was going to represent all 4 of these domains. And that's really why the wheel made sense to her. It did grow out of her spirituality because those 4 domains were represented in the spirituality that she practiced. And that was how people experienced their sexuality. It was in these 4 domains. And so it was as people experienced their sexuality as it was working for them, as it was really good for them. But as Gina explored, it also was when people's sexuality wasn't working for them. Like when their sexuality had been traumatic or whatever, they also would describe that it had affected them in their body. It had affected them emotionally. It had affected them mentally. It had affected them spiritually. So in many ways, it also worked with this model too. And so as Gina worked with it more and more and more, it was like it just kept working. Like this model just kept working over and over and over. And really that's what made it so extraordinary. She got just under 4,000 responses.
Wow.
From survey that she sent out that she really didn't think she was going to get any response. Almost 4,000. And her data right now is sitting at the Kinsey Institute for Ph.D. students to use. And I'm expecting that we will see probably several PhDs come out of the data. It's never really been used for PhDs in the yet, but since she's turned it over to the Kinsey Institute, I think we're going to see a lot of doctoral studies come out of it. It's really remarkable data and some of the largest data that has been gathered in this way.
Over what time period did she get 4,000 responses? Do you know?
Gosh, I think it was in less than a year.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Remember? Yeah. Yeah. And it was all, Mara said, it was all snail mail. It just came in.
Back in the day when there were stamps.
Yeah, right.
Books, right. Mm-hmm. So if I understand you right, this started with asking people who were, what did you say, easily orgasmic. So like people where we would think sex is working well for them, right? As opposed to so much sex therapy research seems to be problem focused, right? Yeah. So it started there, but then when she started looking at problems, that also fit. That's
right. Then she just started asking them more, how do you experience your sexuality? Tell me more about how you experience your sexuality.
Yeah.
Kamara, isn't the entire study in the book Women Who Love Too Much?
That is exactly what everyone used to say. Do you mean women who love too much?
No, it's women who love sex.
Women who love sex.
That's right.
Wow.
Women who love sex.
Back then, it was the age of women who love too much, right?
Wow. Right.
Or women who hate sex, you mean? No, she would say, no, not women who love sex. Women who love sex. So the whole thing is in women who love sex. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. The whole study is in women who love sex.
Wow. All right. So what is the 4D wheel? I mean, you've sort of talked about these 4 domains already, but can you expound a little bit on what this wheel is?
Sure. So if we just use our imagination and you picture yourself walking into a room and there's a cloth on the ground and it has maybe, square cloth. It has delineators so that there are 4 quadrants. So there's a quadrant for the mind, a quadrant for the body, a quadrant for the heart, and a quadrant for the spirit. And there might be some objects in there or not, but basically that's it. There might just be cards, but basically you could think of even like a square napkin with 4 plastic knives and mind, body, heart, spirit written in each corner of the napkin. And then there's a lot of different ways. We have cards that people make, and people make incredibly all kinds of different wheels.
Yeah.
And so you can do it for yourself, and you can also have a therapist or a healer or practitioner walk through it with you, which is really nice because then we can kind of guide you in a completely non-pathologizing, what is your experience like kind of way. And then it can evolve into, I do it in a private practice where it takes anywhere from an hour to 2 hours if I do a fuller one. And then I run a 5-day workshop where the wheel is there the entire time in the middle of the room. And we all sit around the wheel, and each woman brings 2 objects. One object that represents something in her sexual story that she would like to move away from, and something in her sexual story that she would like to nourish or move toward. And so all of those objects are in the wheel, and we can move them and we walk around them, and we people come up and they talk about the story as it relates, their story as it relates to their objects. Tina also runs a 5-day workshop for therapists to learn how to do it, but also to, work on their own pieces of what they need to do.
Right. So you can use the wheel. You can use the wheel around many different things. And that's what's so incredible about the wheel. Like if there is a particular place in your own life that you feel stuck, and there's something that you want to move away from, and there's something you want to move towards, you can bring an object that represents what you want to move away from and what you want to move towards. Let's say it's around self-care, or I've done couples workshops where we've done it around loving, what keeps you from loving your partner the way that you want to, and what's holding you back. So what would it look like to move towards loving your partner the way you want to, and what are you wanting to move away from? What's holding you back? And people will bring objects, and we'll work with those objects over the course of a weekend with like 4 couples. And it's really incredibly profound as people get up out of their chair and they work with their objects, placing them in the different quadrants. It's always surprising to me how powerful it is in creating shifts and changes in people's lives that are lasting, what we call, in family therapy, second order changes.
Yeah.
That are not just changes for right then, but actually hold and stick in people's lives and create these aha moments for people.
And it sounds like a big part of this is directional. What are you moving away from and what are you moving towards, right? Superimposed on these 4 dimensions is this sort of directional path.
Right.
And it also sounds like the objects are a significant part of this too.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yes. I'll give you another example. So let's say that, like, lots of us would say we have anxiety, right? So if you thought about your anxiety and then you thought about an object that represents that anxiety, then you think about the opposite of anxiety. So let's say maybe it's calm. And then you think of an object that represents calm. Then what you would do is you would come into the wheel and you would say, walk around and go, where do I want to put my anxiety? Whatever that object is that represents anxiety. And so maybe you put it in emotional. Maybe you put it in because it feels like an emotional anxiety. Other people might put it in mental, maybe, because they feel like they're spinning around in their heads all the time.
Right.
But it's up to them. It's their story. I'm not the one saying where it goes. They get to say. Yeah. And then they walk around again and find a place for the object that represents calm. And so maybe that's what they're moving toward. And then they would walk around and go, where do I want to put calm? Maybe it's in my body. Maybe it's in my spirit. Never thought of it that way. Okay. So then they would put it in there. And then we would walk around and we would talk a little bit more about why did you pick that object? And what does that object mean to you? And then what happens is you get to externalize your problem and you get to actually move it around and go, wow, this one, the first time that I felt that was when I was 5 or 12. And so we get to talk about 5 and 12 sometimes. Yeah. And so then things, because we're standing up and we're usually walking in a clockwise direction, there's all sorts of elements that are happening where there's movement going on. And so when you're standing up with someone and walking with them around the wheel, it's very different than sitting across from them on the sofa. And so a lot of different kinds of cathartic experiences will come forth. It's kind of nice, I think, sometimes for people to not have to look into the therapist's eyes or think that the therapist knows it all, but it's very much their own experience of their own body wisdom and truth that comes forth. Because if they're in the mental maybe and saying something that was happening to them a long time ago, and then we bring in, what was going on for you then, and then maybe some tears come up, and then we'll just say, what are the tears? And let's stand in the emotional quadrant for a while. Or maybe the tears feel physical for them. And we'll just say, what's happening for you now? Where do you want to stand? And then they start to learn it and they start to take themselves around. And there's this magic that happens where they might be feeling like they're in a space where they were a long, long time ago. But then as they go around, they start to discover their own body wisdom and mental wisdom and emotional, spiritual wisdom of where they really want to be. And that's why it's so transformational, because it's not somebody else saying you're supposed to feel this way or do this exercise, it's very much an experiential learning and growth that happens.
So the image I'm getting too is it's not like we just go clockwise around the wheel and and see each quadrant. It seems like it's a really meandering journey, right? Like we're going to stand in these spaces because we're touching into that part of ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like some people, they might be like, okay, I'm going to put this object and we're going to talk about it in the mental. Because that's where I reside. Like I'm super, I'm very intellectual and I read books and I've got degrees and I'm a CEO, or, that this is their wheelhouse is the mental space. And so we might stand there for a while and then something might happen in their story where we move somewhere, but we might jump over the physical and go into emotional, or some people walk into the spiritual and they're like, whoa, yeah, this is it. Like I've got so much story here. I was born this and raised that and graduated into this and now I'm not, and or something like that. And other people might not ever step into the spiritual quadrant. They just walk by and go, I don't know here. I have no idea. And then we go to wherever else they need to go.
In that kind of case, would you at some point in the process say, wow, I noticed you don't even go to the spiritual quadrant. What might that be about? Or is there, do you direct in that way?
Yeah, it depends on, like, if there's something really rich going on everywhere else, then that's great. We stay there. Like if you're, if we're in the emotional and we're getting to something that is like incredibly therapeutic, then we don't need to do anything else. It's totally, it's almost like an art at certain points, but if you go by the person's truth, then it's really very authentic and real. And that's why I think it works so well, because we could go, okay, we have a little bit more time. Let's go around over to that quadrant again since we didn't do that. Or maybe we run out of time because it was too juicy somewhere else.
Right.
And that's great. That's totally great. So at a certain point in the wheel, there are about 500 million different options. And you kind of have to go with whatever our truth is at the moment. And It might be that we, stop for a minute and get some water and sit down in the quadrant while we talk about the emotional, but that's okay too.
Right.
It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there.
Tina, could you share an example that's sexually specific? Since the podcast is Better Sex, and I'm thinking of people that are listening that might have sexual concerns or relationship issues, something like that. Like, what have you maybe seen somebody transform using the wheel?
I've had couples come in and where they felt really stuck in their relationship, and I had one couple where they had been through my retreat that we run in our institute. And when they had been through the retreat, it was at the retreat that there was like a realization that there had been an early trauma in the man's life. And so after the retreat, they got into therapy, and there was some, movement into doing some, I don't know, like addiction work and blah, 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 just all of a sudden. And then about 3 years later, they contacted me, and they had been through like 5 therapists and group work and addiction work and individual work. She'd been an individual, all this.
Well,
had gotten better, and then they'd gotten worse.
Yeah.
Right. So they called and they said, can we come in to see you? And I said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm super busy and I'm really not taking anybody, but I will see you guys for 2 3-hour sessions. But I would like for you to contact everybody and not see anybody for those, 2 times. And so I did 1 3-hour just to get a sense of where everybody was. And then in the second 3-hour, I did wheel work with them. And I asked them to just bring in symbols about what it meant to move into intimacy with each other, and what did they want to move away from. And they had never really looked at the effect of the trauma that he had been through. And so he was able to bring in a symbol of what intimacy was going to look like for him, and moving away from the effect of the trauma and the fear for him. And for him being able to externalize it was this really powerful thing. And for her to sit and just listen to him tell the story as he moved the object around, what it meant to move close to her, and then what the fear was just really so eye-opening for her. Like she had never seen it in that way before. And when he was able to sit down, for him to be able to, for her to talk about intimacy, for her, she had this hesitancy to move into intimacy because his trauma had cost them so much in their marriage.
Yeah.
So she had this hesitancy around moving into intimacy. They had many children. So she had this object that was sort of like moving close and moving far away. Just it had this hesitancy with it. And so she could describe that. And so as she was moving around the wheel, that really came out. But he could hear it because it was this object that was outside of her.
Yeah.
And he took it personally, which was, I think, the first time he was able to hear her without taking it personally. Because shame had kept him from hearing her. You know, like he would get so defensive before.
Yeah.
Because shame from his background was so big, right? And so it was just this lovely session where they were able to hear each other and hear themselves, I think, in ways that they hadn't ever before. And there were just, you know, tears and I don't know. And I honestly, this is what's so cool about doing wheel work. I felt like I sat back the entire time. You know, I could have had a drink in my hand, you know, but and just watching the wheel do the work.
Wow.
You know, it was just really, really fun. And I felt like they did like a year's worth of work in 3 hours. And so we did that. And then I checked in with them about 4 months later, and they were working together in ways that they hadn't been in years. He was helping with the kids. He was hearing her. You know, she felt like she had a partner in the family and he wasn't working against her. It was just like they were partners, and they hadn't been functioning that way in, I don't even know if they had been in, you know, and I think it was just because they could hear each other in non-pathologizing ways and with compassion and empathy, like they just hadn't had space to before.
Right.
And Gina talks about, you know, there are these like 4 elements really of the wheel, and it's
they're the core dynamics.
Core dynamics. You create a safe space is one of the things that you do. You create ritual, and ritual is really the way that you prepare the space, the way that you keep people walking in the space, the way that you set up the wheel. That's all done the same every single time, right?
Okay.
So that's all ritualized. You concretize things by having people bring a symbol. And that moves the quote unquote problem, but also the solution outside of the person so that they can work with it, right? And they can see it. And even after you've done the work, you invite them to take their symbols home and to put them in a sacred place at home where they can see it. And they can go, okay, this place where I did my work, I know what these things stand for now, right? So you help them concretize it, right? And the fact that and then the 4th one is movement. You get them out of their chair and you embody it. So I think when you're creating neurobiological change, and we know this from the new neurobiology research, that when you have people creating shift on the body, mind, soul, spirit, on all 4 quadrants of the human experience, you're actually creating neurobiological shift in a much more coherent, dynamic way, right? Than if you're just talking, right? You're just creating shift on one place. If you're doing in all 4 areas, you're going to create that shift, that change neurobiologically faster, right? Which is what we do when we do wheel work. We've got them up out of their chair. They're working with their mind. They're speaking out loud. You're working with all 4 senses and the body all at once. And I think that's why the change sticks. Because the whole person and the relation, in this case, the relationship is all working at one time.
So what's the difference doing this in like private practice therapy where somebody's just meeting with you versus a workshop setting where you're in a group? You know, are there benefits to the one or the other? Is there something that fits better for people?
I don't know. I think they're different. I mean, I think it's really fun to do it in your office, and that works for people's lives and time. I could say that doing it with couples when you're away, when I've done that, they get to watch each other shift and change. One of the comments I got when I did a couples retreat one time is somebody said, people looked different by the end of the week. Like physically, they even looked different. Like they could watch each other's change.
Yeah.
That is fun. You also, when you're doing it in a group, there's a way in which you bond with each other because you're watching vulnerable shifts and changes with each other.
Right.
So it's community.
Yeah.
Right. And that's really fun. Kamara does a phenomenal women's sexual stories retreat at Esalen every year. I do a retreat down in Mexico that I'm taking over for Gina. I'll do it in late March. So getting away with a group of people and working on a shift and a change where you can do some work, but then also have time to spend nourishing and nurturing yourself is something that we don't often do.
Yeah.
I think Kamara does great work at Esalen, and Gina's, she would go down to Mexico every single year and spend time taking care of herself and then running a workshop. So we're taking that over for her now too. So
one of the things that the group does differently than individuals or couples in a private practice is there's this magic that happens, and we feel so isolated in our suffering. And I think that we can still feel pretty isolated in our suffering just going to a therapist. But when we go into a group situation and someone comes up there bravely and starts talking about their story, and it could be a deeply painful story. And usually what I'll say is there anyone else in the room that has had this experience? Please raise your hands. And we get a lot of hands raised, and then we'll have them come up and support the person who is standing in the wheel. And so it's sort of a psychodrama gestalt type of exercise that we can implement with a group. And so what happens then is that those people got triggered, right? And usually we're trying to avoid triggers in life and therapy.
Right.
What we're wanting in the wheel is to actually create triggers. We're trying to create some anxiety even, and try to really get at, like, you can use a lot of somatic therapy and see what's really happening. And so when that person has maybe continued to look around and see that they're supported, they're not alone, even in this big room with this, wheel, and then they're kind of okay, and then I say to the others that raise their hand, how are you now? And then we might move into some other people's stories because they start to evolve, and we are all actually so similar that I think that we're actually the most similar in our suffering, because that truly does connect us, as well as our joys, and so when people start to transform, like Tina says, by Wednesday, people have glow and they're smiling and they're not shy anymore. And, like, you get to get this essence and this spirit of this person that starts to evolve, and it's just infectious. And so then the healing it's sort of like, it's like the longer version of what happens in the private practice, where it's sort of like the suffering and then it's the healing, because that's the whole point, is to get the healing. Yeah. And we do it with all different kinds of sexual issues too. So erectile dysfunction, early ejaculation, dyspareunia, affairs, women who feel shame for being super horny all the time, or men who are like, going crazy because they only love their wife, but their wife doesn't want to have sex as much, or the other way around, like we see the gamut of it, and they all work in the wheel because, again, we're not like a Google search or a book or some podcast that they heard that said you're supposed to do this, or society or religion. It's more like, well, what are you about, and how do you experience, where did erectile dysfunction start for you, and what does it mean to you, and how has it affected you, and what happens for you when your partner, your husband wants you to have sex with him and you can't get an erection, and things like that. So it creates a lot of dynamic diversity, so that we're not the experts. You're the expert.
Yeah. So what for people listening who might want to take advantage of this, certainly they could go to one of your workshops, but could you give some tips? Could people do this at home by themselves? What would you suggest if people wanted to dive into this a little bit and sort of discover the power of the wheel?
Well, one of the things that's really helpful is going on the 4D Network website, and then Gina's written so many books. And Tina also has a book called Sex, God, and the Conservative Church, which is fabulous. And then Gina has, for therapists, she has Expanding the Practice of Sex Therapy and Exploring Desire and Intimacy. And for therapists and other people, The Return of Desire, The Heart and Soul of Sex, The ABCs of Love and Sex, and Women Who Love Sex. There's lots of sex in there, huh?
Right, there is. Okay.
So The Return of Desire and Heart and Soul of Sex. And then there's also some different learning options on the 4D Wheel Network.
Okay.
Website, so they can go on there and download coursework that's in there and learn about it there. But you can also just simply write down some cards that say mind, body, heart, and spirit, 5x8 index cards, and put them down and just take some kind of like a belt or a ribbon or something like that, and then just make it so that there's quadrants, and you could walk into it and go, okay, what's my dilemma? Should I stay or should I go?
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And again, those objects to take it outside of yourself, right? Concretizing.
Right.
Object for what you move towards, what you want to move away from, and start to just experiment with where that takes you, I guess.
Yeah, like if you're having an affair, let's say, and you really you love your husband and you got kids, but you're having an affair with this woman and it's really amazing, right? But you don't want to lose your family and you do love them too. But you're really torn, right? And so maybe you could even make your own wheel, bring an object that represents each person, and then you could put that down and kind of like wrestle it out with yourself, or stand in the wheel without any object, and you could go, let's say, the woman is on the right and the man is on the left, and you could just stand to the right of the emotional quadrant and go, how do I feel about her emotionally? Okay, now stand to the left, and how do I feel about him emotionally? It's sort of like a pro-con list, mind, body, heart, spirit, right?
Right.
So that you move around in each quadrant and go, okay, so I'm going to notice spiritually. How do I really feel spiritually about her versus him? And then mentally and physically.
Yeah.
Physically, ooh la la, not so much. Yeah. So,
Cool.
yeah.
And if somebody feels a little bit more like they like to learn the nitty gritty, Gina's got a mini course that's on the site, and they can take that mini course just for fun, learn a little bit more about the details of it, and then they would really kind of know how to lay down their own wheel at home and, kind of how to play with it and do it. Some people like to learn a little bit more,
Right.
and they can do that. They can certainly do that. It's an online course, and you're welcome to do that. Or you can fly down and go to Esalen and go to Kamara's thing at Esalen. Going to Esalen's an awesome thing, or it's a half an hour south of Puerto Vallarta and come down. There are things that you can do to just sort of learn to do it. And it's fun. It's a wonderful thing.
Where would people find, besides the two of you, other practitioners who've been trained in this, who work with this? Is that part of the 4D Wheel Network website too, that you can find therapists or workshops?
Well, we lost Gina to this planet, unfortunately, on November 2nd of this year. And we are organizing everyone. You can now get certified as a 4D practitioner. And we have, I don't even know about 50 maybe certified practitioners around the United States. We haven't got it so that you can actually find everybody very easily, but you can contact us at the 4D Network and we can let you know if there's somebody in your area.
Okay.
There's an events page. There's also an events page that where there's some people on the East Coast, for example, that either are, doing like a medical training or to gynecologists, or maybe it's a retreat for couples, or, a meditation 4D wheel, one day Saturday in middle of the country. So we do have an events page that includes other people that are using the 4D wheel for sure.
Okay, great.
We just haven't got ourselves to a place where we have a directory quite up yet.
Right.
But things aren't quite done yet.
It's good to know that people could also Google this or look at therapists, and if they say they're 4D certified, right? Hopefully that's true, but that might be at least a starting point for them.
So. Yeah, we're getting there.
Yay, great. Well, thank you so much. I will put links to as much of this as I can in the show notes and to your two events. So Tina, yours in Mexico is for therapists only, or is it for everybody?
It's for anybody that is a healer of any type. So anybody that is engaged in just sort of helping people live better lives. So we've tried to make it so that you can come, you want to learn about the neurobiology of change and healing. And so we're going to spend time in the morning learning the 4D wheel and how you can implement that, whether you're a physician or a PT or acupuncture or therapist or psychologist or psychiatrist, whatever. And then the afternoon, you can spend on your own healing, your own nourishment, or doing more wheel work or whatever. It's just a really healing place in the world. It's a place Gina went every year.
Okay.
So we'll be doing that there. And then some of the people that are coming actually want to learn a little bit more about how to train in wheel work. So we'll be doing some of that for them too, want to sort of learn that next level.
Okay, Kamara, when are you next at Esalen?
March 17th through the 22nd. So it's just coming up in 3 weeks-ish. And there's still a few spots available if anybody wants to come. And it is totally transformational. It's an amazing place. It's food is incredible. It's got hot tubs that are coming geothermally out of the earth and right into the ocean, where you can look over at all the wonderful sea life. And then the group that we have is always, it feels to me like we know each other better in 3 days than we know most of our friends that we've had for years. So, and we have a lot of fun. There's a lot of breakout groups, and I'm also a trained belly dancer. So we do a lot of movement, and then we do a shamanic journey to find the keeper of your sexual flame, and lots more fun stuff too. So
is that something you do basically annually, or is that more frequently than that?
It's annually. Usually it's in February, but this year it's in March. So.
Okay, just because I don't think this will air by the time people are listening to this now. It probably happens, but they could be on, it could be on the radar for next year, for 2020.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Definitely.
Well, thank you both so much for taking the time and sharing the work with all of us.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For having us.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yes. Well, we'll see each other again soon, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get-to-know-you and question-and-answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.